right. Good morning, everybody. This is Bob Turner. We're coming at you live from the content room here in Portland, Maine. Again, 95 India Street. We're with Powers Promotions, and we're setting up for another podcast here with Ben McCrillis from Gorham, Maine. Super excited about it. We want to say that the podcast is sponsored by Turner Builders. We do contracting, remodeling, large-scale renovations, basically anything attached to a house. And I always like to mention Mitchell Powers of Powers Promotions, too. He's gracious enough to have us in here, give us a nice place to do this. And it's really been a lot of fun lately, and we're kind of getting on a one-a-week track. So it's been cool. So to that end, we ran into Ben McCrillis from Gorham, Maine. And Ben's quite a cat. I've got a long intro of him, if you'd be patient with me here for a second. But he's a Westbrook High grad, state champion wrestler, and went on to win 123 victories at American International, where he was a four-time all-conference wrestler. He finished fourth, third, second, and third at the NCAA East Regional Championships and qualified for the NCAA Championships 3 times. There's more. He's won 3 national championships and was the AAU World Champion, qualified for the 08 Olympic Trial qualifiers. He's also being inducted into the Maine Sports Hall of Fame this year in 2023, somewhere in October, I think. He owns and operates Train Maine right here in Westbrook, Maine. He's an entrepreneur, an athlete, and just someone that operates at a high level. And you guys know that those are the kind of people I'm looking to have on the Summit podcast. He's a 12-year adjunct professor at USM in the exercise sciences area. He's got a master's in sports psychology and anatomy and physiology. The list goes on. Ben, welcome. Thanks for being here. I appreciate you taking the time. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Maybe I left out a few things.
I think that pretty much wraps it up.
Good deal. Thank you for coming. We have a blast today. No, I'm just kidding.
Sure. After college, I was sort of still pursuing athletic pursuits. I still wanted to continue with higher education. I had moved around a little bit from Massachusetts and New York, but eventually I think I came back home to Maine. I think it was probably a little more economically feasible to start a business in Maine.
Sure.
Thinking I would have good ties. Interestingly enough, the street I grew up on, at the end of it was an old spinning mill, and I had the opportunity to open up a facility there. The rent was right in my wheelhouse. I think I kind of looked at the big picture of what I was doing as a strength coach, whether it was working with athletes or personal training, and I saw that the percentage of money they were taking off the top for my services. So if I looked at the hours, I looked at the numbers, and it made sense to go out on my own after a while. And I didn't want to burn any bridges, but I wanted to make that lateral transition to having my own space. And it's a whole different set of challenges because you're now responsible for not just the area in which you provide your service, but you're also in charge of the service area.
Right.
And that kind of leaves a sense of urgency in the back of your mind that you can't just leave work at 5 o'clock. Work never really leaves you. But then there's freedom in that. So there's an exchange of benefits and challenges because you have your own garden, but you have to plant your own corn.
Right. Yeah, we talk a lot about that on the podcast about, trading a 9 to 5 for a 24/7, and it really is. I mean, you're clearly an accomplished guy on the fitness side and the educational side. When it came time to go into business, how did you take those skills, traits, all of that stuff, and leverage it as a business owner to make sure that you didn't flame out in 2 or 3 months?
I knew I wanted to be a coach. To which capacity, I'm not sure, but I knew I wanted to be a coach when I cared more about the athletes I was working about, their development, than my own. That's when I knew I needed to make that transition from working with somebody and developing them, than giving them pieces of, whether it be philosophical or anatomical coaching from myself, building the program for them. I think in the early stages of any athlete or even a coach, you kind of take with what you have and what's available to you. My best resources were my experiences. And as you evolve as a coach, you realize that you're trying to understand their experiences and their direction. And focusing more on that, focusing more on where they need to go. I mean, basically, I'm a bucket filler. That's my whole job. I take an athlete, I assess them, I take the information, I take the data from the assessment, and I take the information I have from when they first sit down with me and tell me their goals, and I bridge that gap but the bridge is constructed with science. The bridge is constructed with data and their history.
Right.
You know, so my job is to be a bucket filler. My job is to take things that they lack and fill that bucket. Now, if their bucket is filled with strength, it's not that we don't take a look at that bucket and develop it more. It's just not a bucket that has an urgency to be filled. So my job is to fill the buckets that are empty and then bridge that gap between what they want and what they need.
Yeah, so really personalized stuff. I mean, I think that the health, fitness, personal training, boutique type of shop, private training world seems to be getting more active, more prevalent. Your shop is you're not Planet Fitness. People aren't walking in there and swiping a card. You're by appointment only private training, correct?
Yep. Yeah. So my thing was I didn't want to become a gym. I wanted to become a private training facility, meaning that I wanted when people to come in there to have an appointment. So when they come through that door, they're getting instruction and they're getting programming. I think what you see now is that this industry is a non-regulated industry. Right. And I'll give you an example of what that means. I can't sit down and talk to you about your personal life and give you instruction unless I'm a board certified therapist, psychologist, psychiatrist.
Same for nutrition, right?
Sure, right. Yeah. But I can take a weekend course and instruct you to put 500 pounds on your back. Now, you tell me the difference between the two. Because it's non-regulated, anybody can do it. Because it's non-regulated, I can just hop on the internet right now, find a really low level certification and become quote unquote certified over the weekend.
Right.
And someone like myself who spent a lot of time in school or who has gone through the certification process, we are now both under the same umbrella, but we're not the same thing. So to answer your question kind of the long way, my job was to have a facility where, we had three things that we really wanted to focus on. Number one, safety, or being safe, smart, and community. That were the three pillars of my job philosophy, is that I wanted people to come in, they felt safe.
Yeah.
I didn't want them to, and again, people coming through that door is different when they came to the door 10, 15 years ago. Right. There are more and more people working out now than ever before, and it's growing. Back in 1990, there was really only 2 facilities in the Southern Maine area to work out in, and they weren't really open that much. You had Union Station Fitness and you had Gold's Gym and some sprinkle of others.
Lifestyle program.
Right. And you were limited. I wanted a place where people would come and they were going to learn it right the first time. The thing is, the person coming through that door now is smarter than the person coming through the door the first time 20 years ago. The difference is this. You see, learning new things is easy. Unlearning the old things is hard. So the person that's coming through that door now has already seen 4 or 5 trainers.
Right.
They've already gone to 4 or 5 different practitioners.
Yeah.
So there's 4 or 5 different philosophies rattling off in their head, and they're adding social media influencers at the same time. And again, would you take advice, financial advice from someone, over the internet you've never met before? Then why would you take that advice, whether it's to digest something or to follow a fitness program? The difference is that you don't get anything when you get with fitness the first time you engage in it. I give you $400 with pretty much anything else. I get something of substance in my hand.
Sure.
I give you $400 of fitness, I'm getting a promise. It's a big difference. You're building a trust. The money's paid out, and there is there's a commitment, but there's also a connection, and there's a trust between 2 parties. Because you don't get anything at first. You really probably get sore.
Yeah.
Right? Right. But hopefully you're getting an understanding that this is a process. We're trying to elevate the sea so that all boats rise.
Right.
Whether it's nutrition, mobility, recovery, and just healthy training habits. So it's a little different, and that's changed a lot. There's a lot of false philosophies floating off in there. It's a lot of F's, but there's a lot of false training philosophy floating out there, and I have to combat that. Right. So it makes my job a little tougher, but I wanted to have a facility or a home base for them to come in and feel safe, feel that smart training, and that they're part of a community. And that was my goal.
When you've got to set yourself up for success too. I remember, and you and I talked about Stan Schofield when we were first.
Great guy.
Good friend of yours, good friend of mine, and he's been on the podcast. But when I went to see him, I said, Stan, I just need some help. I got to get going, And he says, listen, you come down here, you work, you got to come 3 times a week or I won't work with you.
Yeah.
So I mean, I respected that and I didn't miss anything because he kind of laid down the law. Sure. Like, listen, we can't have success if you can't at least show up 3 times a week.
Yeah.
You know, you're not going to pop in on a Monday afternoon or maybe on a Thursday. We're not going to have success.
Right.
You know, you got to be willing to change what you're doing. So do you do a lot of work with people as far as just the mentality of accepting that the working out into your lifestyle, you know, and bringing that? Do you find that you have to break down that barrier with people a lot?
Well, I think that the first thing a young trainer needs to know is that some people aren't ready yet.
Right.
And that's hard. If you're a type A personality, you're thinking, I'm going to find a way. I'm going to find some angle to get to them. It's like that coaching philosophy. You want every kid on that team batting 500, and it may not happen. They may not be ready for it.
Right.
The other part too is that you have to undo, in some cases, 10, 15, 20, maybe even 40 years of bad habits. To undo that, think about how hard it is for you to change. Now think how hard it is to change somebody else. That's a hard thing to do.
Yeah.
So, and this isn't, training with somebody for an hour is easy. I mean, anybody can probably relatively keep a strong focus for an hour.
Sure.
Nutrition's all day long. And if you've been eating a Dunkin' Donuts diet and a TV diet and a horrible, alcohol, regimen on the weekends, asking someone to go ahead and start eating chicken and rice, that's heavy. Yeah, of course. So, I mean, imagine if you've never had a job your whole life and then you're going to go right into a 40-hour work week.
Yeah, no.
Especially if you're older, because you're regimented, you're stuck in your ways. So understanding the philosophy behind getting people who've never done the things you need them to do to start doing them today is very, very difficult. Plus, you're doing that, or you're asking that of them, because we're trying to get from A to B in the quickest time possible.
Right.
If people understood, like, sure, you can do it your way. Sure, you can take some of the things I'm requiring from you and maybe do 50% of the first thing I've asked you to do, 75% of the second thing I've asked you to do, and 20% of the third thing I've asked you to do. That's fine. But just let you know, we've gone from the timeline of getting where you want to get to in 6 months and now maybe 3 years.
Yeah.
If you're okay with that and that's your understanding, that's fine.
But that's how they were doing it. And now I always say, well, how's that working out for you?
Yeah.
And
you also want to empower them too. I mean, the fact of the matter is that everyone comes through that door has an intrinsic value system versus an extrinsic value system. Some people, they might be externally motivated to change their body because of the way they look, both negative and positively, meaning that they might be extrinsically motivated because while they lifted something up heavy, they want to lift that something up heavy again. Or, geez, their body looks better in that dress, and that's what motivates them and motivates them to maybe work a little harder. Intrinsically, they might have some motivational factors like, geez, I want to be around more for my kids.
Yeah.
Or, geez, I want to have a better relationship with food, or I want to have a better relationship with working out.
Well, you mentioned motivation. That's one of the things before we turn the camera on we were going to talk about a little bit. And I hear a lot of that in the personal development world. Hey, I can't teach you motivation. I might be able to motivate you, kick you in the ass, get you going. But what you really need is discipline. Talk about the difference.
Well, and psychologically, you would say that the difference between something that's motivating and something that has a drive is one is a thought and one is an action.
Okay.
Whereas I could be motivated to do a lot of things, but until I actually make that step and make that step consistently, it's just a thought process. Right. It sounds good,
no action,
but that rusts in your head after a while, because what happens is you start to compromise with yourself, meaning that I missed it today, tomorrow I'll go twice as hard.
Right.
I had a bad meal today, so tomorrow I'll eat super, super hard. And you make those exchanges. And oftentimes
negotiation that goes on in your head, right?
Sure. And they sound good to say, but then that builds another habit. We're all cyclical mentally and physically. So when we're making agreements with ourselves, if we're making deals with ourselves, what we're ultimately saying is, hey, at the end of the day, I've provided myself escape route. When I have to do things I promised myself I was going to do, I've given myself a safe route, and I've felt less guilty for giving me that safe route because I promised myself later on.
Yeah.
Ultimately, you're not holding yourself accountable, and oftentimes that's why people come to a coach.
Yeah, you mentioned safety as one of your three pillars, right? Define safety, because that can be, hey, I don't want to drop the weights on my head, but I think it meant more than that.
Yeah.
Really.
I'll give you a perfect example. I went to the dentist. I've had teeth problems just because of sports I've been in, but I've gone to the dentist one day and they're giving me a cleaning and my teeth are bleeding. Like, oh, your teeth are bleeding.
Yeah.
Everything okay? I'm like, Well, they weren't bleeding when I came in here. I think you did that. So I think when people come in for the first time, my job is, my number one philosophy is do no harm.
Yeah.
It's do no harm. That has to be stated, because before we lift a kettlebell, before we run, before we start doing mobility, my job is to provide them a service without harm.
And don't you think that that's a measure of a great coach too? Like, I've had some times when I've come away from somebody, I don't feel any better, or in fact, I feel I kind of feel worse. Like, that's not really a great way to come away from working with a coach, right?
Yeah, I mean, it depends. What we define as pain, but I would say that
I'm not going to ask you for your pain threshold. I'm pretty sure what it is.
No, it's but also that can mask, what's safe and what's not safe. So when I talk about safety, I mean, is this appropriate? So when I train, I always think about, if my mentor or coaches that I've had in my past, and I was lucky, I had a lot of great, part of my past is that what I lacked in certain developmental areas of my life, I had great coaches. I had world-class coaches at a very young age.
Sure.
I didn't appreciate it maybe until later on, but I try to, and I don't always do it, but I try to coach in a way that if they were to walk up at any given time and ask me, why are you doing that? I would have an answer. Sure. And a legitimate
Where
answer.
you headed with that?
Right. There's a reason for which we do things. There's a reason for which this particular exercise in this block, why the sets, reps, intensity, rest, recovery, why they're implemented that way. There's a reason for it. And when you don't have a reason for it, you're just kind of making shit up.
So I've heard it said, people like let's take New Year's, and people come out of New Year's, they're coming in hot, right?
Sure.
And they're thinking it's 80% gym, 20% nutrition. But I would argue that at times, if some of those people would just go 80% paying attention to their nutrition and not do the hour and a half on the treadmill or the hour and a half on the stair stepper, I see a lot of people at the gym just pounding cardio. Can you talk about, this is kind of a two-part question, but what do you think about that ratio? But also, can you talk about, like, if somebody had an hour, right? Are they better off to just go do the Stairmaster for an hour, or should they just do some weights and do 30, 40 minutes and call it a day?
Yeah. The best workout's the next one.
Yeah.
Because you could sit down and you could really put on an incredible display of athleticism and do 55 minutes on the treadmill or plyometrics or sprints but here's the deal. Are you going to do the same intensity the second day?
Right.
Because if you start on top of the mountain, there's only one way to go.
Right.
And that's down. The percentage of where people are physically and where people are physiologically, that ratio changes. So if I said to you, your results are 80% nutrition, 20% training, well, that depends where you are in your fitness. If you are a fit person, that's not going to be your ratio.
Right.
Working with like high-level athletes, like Olympic-level athletes, my job has never become more clear than it has lately, is that when you work with a high-level athlete, you work yourself out of your coaching position.
Right. That's your job.
Right. Yeah. I mean, they got there before you met them. If we're being honest, there's a lot of people that want to take advantage or maybe take
notoriety
for their development. The fact of the matter is, high-level athletes are some of the best people on the planet on their worst day than the average person on the planet. They just are.
Interesting. Yeah.
They are. That's what makes them good.
Yeah.
You look at the Manny Ramirez.
Their lows aren't as low.
Yeah. You look at Manny Ramirez when he swings that, one of the most gifted swingers of all time. But you could tell his approach at the plate is the same probably in Little League as it probably is in the major leagues.
Or like a closer with a short memory, right?
Yeah, you have to, because you're doomed to fail.
Yeah.
You just have to fail a little bit less than the next guy.
Right.
That's really all you're trying to do.
Yeah.
So my job as a coach, the better I coach, the more it takes me out of the coaching equation. Honestly.
Right. Yeah.
Of course, because I'm needed less.
Right.
In fact, when some of my high-class athletes come in and, high-level athletes come in, whether it's Olympian or a pro athlete, and they do something incredible, I kind of sit back and go like, wow, that was pretty good.
Right. Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it takes me out of the equation, because my job as a coach is to not have them need me.
Yeah. No, that's impressive. And I think that, for someone starting out to just being able to establish a little bit of consistency.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people, they start like this and then it starts to wane, right?
Yeah.
What are some things you would say to somebody that might be watching this? It's like, hey, I'm great for 3 or 4 weeks. And then it starts to like, What are some tactics, strategies somebody could put in place? Is it a workout buddy? Is it coming to do some private stuff? How do people keep going?
Everybody's got a different motivational factor. Everybody has a different why.
Yeah.
Everybody has a different why. For some people, it's their kids.
Yeah.
For some people, it's their health.
Yep.
They're on 4 medications.
Right.
For some people, it's, not living with pain every day.
Yeah.
Your why is going to change, but your program should change. People's programs should be set up in either a micro or a macro cycle. With your micro cycle, you're talking anywhere between 3 to 6 weeks, maybe 12 weeks. And your macro cycle is the big picture.
Right.
Your macro cycle is, what are we doing here? So for some people, I want to lose 100 pounds. That's their micro cycle, that macro cycle.
Yeah.
Their micro cycle is, let's get to a point where you've quit multiple times. Like, have you ever made it past 2 or 3 weeks? That's your micro cycle.
Right.
Let's get to there. For some people, that environment needs to change. So I often tell people, you got to switch up 4 things: the frequency, the intensity, the time, or the type. So if you're the kind of person that's been indoors 3 days a week, going for 45 minutes at a moderate to, low level intensity level, maybe it's time for you to go outside one of those days. Maybe it's time for you to go longer on one of those days and shorter the next day.
Yep.
You have to change up one of those 4 elements for the body to get a different stimuli or to adapt. Because again, the body's an adaptive entity. It takes stimuli, adapts to it.
It's really good at it.
And then that stimuli has less of an influence on your body. If I asked you to run the boulevard today, it might take you 45 minutes. But if I had you run it 21, 24, 25 days in a row, the stimuli that you provided in the running, but the length of it didn't change. Your running pace changed.
Right.
So the stimuli was you. You provided the stimuli because you ran harder, right?
Yeah.
But the distance never changed. But the efficiency, how your body has received those yardage, like how well you adapted, how much you utilized oxygen, your pace, your turnover, and your gait. I mean, everything has an adaptive entity to it.
Yeah.
And
so confusing the body. Like, okay, this time on day 6 of running the boulevard, we're going to run 2 poles hard, and we're going to recover for 1 or something like that. Mix it up.
I mean, you can work hard or you can work long, but you can't do both.
Right. Not on the same day, right?
Can't do it. I mean, you look at iron smelting, right? There's a certain level of how much you put that iron ore into the flame and how many times you hit it with a hammer.
Right.
Not enough time, it doesn't mold the right way. Too many, it breaks.
Right.
There's a certain element in science, in strength and conditioning, where we're trying to get people to understand that there's a reason why we're putting you into this stimuli for this long, into this stimuli for this long, and I'm under pressure. Just like the iron smelter, and just like, the blacksmith, there's a reason why we put it into the flame for this amount of time, how many times we hit it, and then how long we cool it for.
Yeah.
When you do it the right way, you have a beautiful piece of steel. You do it too much, it breaks.
Yeah, that's cool. What would you say? I mean, you're doing some things at a high level, working with some Olympic level, world class athletes. But you also here in Westbrook, Maine. What do you like the best? Do you mix it up, or do you find yourself gravitating to one thing more than the other?
If I'm going to be totally honest, the true sign of a coach is not working with pro athletes.
Yeah,
it's not. I think people have a misconception of like what it's like to work with like really high level athletes. Listen, there's some guys that they were born with incredible genetics.
Yeah.
And they're not that much different from the general population, honestly. There's sandbaggers. There's guys who are high level. There's guys who are injured. And it's really hard for a guy that makes 1/10 of your salary to tell you what to do.
Right.
It's really hard to do that.
Yeah.
Number one. Number two, the true sign of a coach is not getting a guy who is already a national champion to win a national title or a world title or an Olympic medal, because it's a lateral shift. They've already achieved greatness in one area.
Yeah.
If they duplicate that greatness, that's awesome, but it's lateral. You take a kid who eats Chinese food for breakfast or fast food for lunch, who's maybe 30 pounds overweight, who's got a weird looking haircut. I'm really describing myself, but you get a guy who is junior varsity, who's, maybe he's got his jock strap on backwards.
Yeah.
He's got a weird looking haircut.
Yeah.
He's got syrup and soda stains on his sweatshirt. You get that kid to become a state champion by the end of his high school career.
You've done something.
Now that kid just jumped massive amounts of levels.
I would add taking somebody that initially doesn't see themselves that way, right? And being able to change their mindset and say, listen, I see you winning this
Sure.
someday, and they look at you like, and then watch them go do it. That's pretty powerful.
Huge. I had a female at Gorham, and she was this girl. I gotta tell you, she came to me her sophomore year. She was playing another sport, and she was like, I was thinking about. I know I've only been training with you for soccer and maybe cross country. I'm kind of thinking about playing lacrosse in the fall. Her name was Jackson Marshall. I hope she hears this because she was one of my favorites. Normal and athletic ability. She's a strong mind.
Yep.
I mean, listen, was she gifted athletically? Sure, she has some athleticism, but mentally was a bulldog. And she was a kind person, and she had a big heart, but she adapted. She took that lacrosse stick, played her sophomore year. Flash forward 6 years later, she wins a national championship down in Florida. And this is a team captain. She's hugging a massive NCAA trophy. She got there because she was willing to open up and listen, take different influences. She was really strong in nutrition. She was really strong in understanding recovery. She had a solid support system.
Student
family.
of the game.
And she did. And usually what people don't understand is how you do something is usually how you do everything.
Yeah.
The old school mentality of like these guys back in the 80s and 90s who were like 5-chip athletes. The reason why coaches don't really want those guys anymore is that when they get to college, they're not eligible.
Yeah.
So they spend all that time and money, but
Right.
they're not eligible, or they have a problem at school or
Right.
an incident. They want people on the upper trajectory that they can mold. Maybe they weren't all 4 years at stud,
Yeah.
but they're on their trajectory on the way up. They want those kids because they're willing to listen, they're willing to be molded, and they're team players.
What do you think about early specialization? Like you've got a kid, let's say, 10, 12, 13 years old, and they're just all baseball, or they're all travel soccer 11, 12 months out of the year, and they're just totally one thing. I've heard people say that, hey, the more stuff they can do going up through, the better statistically, and you probably can speak to this way better than me. Like, how do those early specialist kids do versus, say, the guy that played 3 or 4 sports?
I think we know the statistics right now show that the ones that make it to the highest level did not specialize. When I create programs, I'll put it this way in a different way. When I create programs, I look at 2 things. I generalize when I can. I specialize when I must.
Gotcha.
When I create programs, that's exactly what I do.
Right.
I generalize when I can. And when I mean I generalize fitness. They have to have compound movements. They have to move in 3 planes of motion. They have to move their body weight as well as external weight. They have to run, but they have to be able to slow down and stop. They have to change directions.
Right.
They have to have not just linear speed, but anticipatory speed. They have to have good game IQ. Specialization, if I know that person has a track or a focus that they're really shooting towards, you'll know that pretty much later on in school, especially when they made university or college commitments. So, and even at that point, you'll notice that the younger generation doesn't have the ability as previous generations to hyperfocus for extended periods of time. I mean, you look at a kid, listen to a song, they listen about 15 seconds of it before they fast forward it.
You get burnt out.
Right.
Yeah.
So asking a kid to work out 7 days a week on a sport, he's going to hate it.
Those are the outliers, right? The guys that can do that. And then,
Sure.
how many, there's
They're
not a
the-
ton of kids from Maine, say.
They're the exception to the rule, but not the rule.
Right.
For every one of those kids that can hyperfocus and dial in and sink their teeth in and stay with that kind of training mentality, there's about 6,000 that can't.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean they're any less. They're any less or even worse or any better. It just means that for the average kid, they need variety.
Yep.
You understand, we live in the most stimulating era in mankind. Everything around us is designed to capture our attention for 15 to 30 seconds.
Yeah.
And then we're on to the next one. Whether you control it or it's controlled for you. Now that you could talk about social media, you could talk algorithms, you do anything you want. To ask a child to focus and make an emotional and a physical and a financial, 3 things.
Yeah.
Emotional, physical, and a financial commitment for more than 2 or 3 days a week.
Right.
You're asking a lot. And you're asking a lot from the parents too.
Yeah. That's cool stuff. I appreciate it. Switch gears a little bit. Sometimes I think we should have the camera on when we first sit down and talk because Ben and I would just kind of BS in here on the front end. I said, oh, hang on to that. We talked a little bit about, and I had an experience with this with Scott Bowman at Iron Legion, where I had a space right beside his and met him, and we kind of worked in a collaborative way and just sent clients to one another. You talked about Stan a little bit, and kind of, COVID hit or whatever, and Stan was at OA and then not at OA, and you just basically said, dude, come on over. And that was something that kind of caught my attention, because not a lot of people would have done that. You guys are in like businesses, but you didn't look at it that way.
No, never. I mean, one of the things I kind of shoot myself in the foot for as an early coach is not going to other people that were leaders in the field for more experience and exposure. You got to think, the most intelligent people out there are the biggest thieves. I didn't come up with this. I had to go get that information, right? I had to, whether I pay for it or whether I steal it. So whether I read it in a book or I get it from a magazine, like some of those monikers that come out of people's mouths, like, I'm not that bright. I'm a good thief, though. I'm going to take what you
like that. I'll use that. I do the same thing.
And if that works for you, and again, those monikers I'm talking about are more like those one-liners that say a whole paragraph of information summed up in one line.
Right.
I like those because you don't have a lot of time with a prospective client.
Sure.
You have a very finite amount of time. So why not give them something that leaves them with a thought? You put a seed in there and you planted it.
Right.
It might grow, it might not, but they leave the situation, they leave the conversation, and they say, oh, I like that. I like what you said there. I can do that a lot better than trying to give an anatomical breakdown of the digestive system.
Yeah.
It's a lot easier that way to say, hey, it's great that you're working out. If you need help, maybe you've stumbled. If you need help, I'm here for you. Whatever you need.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's just a talk. Sometimes, it could be an invitation. Sometimes it'd be a quick one-liner. Say, hey, the next, the greatest workout is the one you're not doing.
Right.
It could be any of those. But
I thought that was pretty cool, where you basically invited another guy that's doing what you're doing into your facility and said, hey, bring your operation here.
Sure.
Let's get going.
Well, I look at it this way. Why not have two strong coaches in the same building? And I look at it this way. Like, if you're threatened by another coach, maybe threatened is a strong word, but if you're intimidated or if you're nervous about, having a coach in the same facility as you, I look at that as like, that might be on you. Because, if I'm a magician and I only have 3 tricks, I'm really going to be hard pressed to show you any of them.
Right.
Because I only have 3.
Yeah.
But if you've got a lot of tools in your toolbox, whether you use those tools or not, it took a lifetime for some people or young coaches. Your job is to build that toolbox. Right. But as coaches, our job is to fill the toolbox as much as possible. We might not call upon those tools to be used as much as maybe other coaches do, but they're there. And our job is to take them out and use them when it's appropriate. But also have those tools in that toolbox. And when you're around other coaches, you're sharing tools, or you're learning how to use the tools that you already have better.
You can always learn something, right? The day what is the saying? The day you know everything's the day you stop learning, or something like that. I can't remember the quote, but we talked a little bit about the Maine Sports Hall of Fame before we sat down, and you said one of the biggest reasons I'm excited about this is,
well, I think it's given me a lot of time to reflect. I'm at that age now where I'm in my 40s, and I start thinking about my athletes a lot. I think about my son's success in sports, but I'm also thinking about how far this industry has come, but maybe even how far I've come as an athlete and how much of things have changed. Because again, they always talk about how kids are different. Well, kids are a reflection of your environment, and the environment's changing. Everybody's changing. The philosophies that I use, or the philosophies that were used on me or implemented by other coaches, those types of things have changed. I can't coach kids the way I was coached.
Right.
It doesn't work that way.
Play.
So sometimes when I have a kid that comes in and he's looking for that hard Rocky IV in the trenches of Russia, one more time, you know what I mean?
Siberia.
Kids don't buy that.
Right.
They don't get that. So it has given me a chance to reflect on a little bit more in my career. It's great to be recognized, but it's also great to be recognized as a young kid coming from a small mill town who worked hard, who didn't thrive in the sports that got big attendance. I was in wrestling. It's a blue collar sport. I mean, whether people like to admit that or not, wrestling tends to become a haven for blue collar people And blue collar people tend to be a little rougher, a little tougher, a little meaner. And there's nothing wrong with that. It doesn't mean you can't be tough in other ways, but it tends to attract those types of people. And those types of people don't tend to fill the stands.
Right.
Unless you're in the Midwest or if you're overseas. But, having my mother had me at a young age and not sure if she's going to raise a young man to become, great and making, I think it's every parent's worry. You want to make sure you do the best by your kid.
Right.
So to have my mother there and have her be part of the ceremony or have her be part of this experience, it's really kind of a way to come full circle because when I first started wrestling, I got my butt kicked. And my first match, I'm crying. I'm a little kid, but I'm crying in the bleachers and my mom's trying to pull me in.
Yeah.
Because I'm crying. I wanted to, I'm like, leave me alone. This sport sucks. I hate this. So being a young man crying, pushing my mother away who just wants to be there has come full circle because I'm sure that when she goes up to get that award this year, she'll be crying.
Yeah.
And I'll be trying to pull her in.
That's something, yeah.
And that to me is full circle. And that to me, it matters because, again, this path that we're on, right? It was never about the journey. And you don't realize that until you get older. And that in this world, youth is king.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
No
You
doubt.
don't realize it until you're too old, you're much older. But I think for me, it's great being recognized. It's great being honored, and I definitely appreciate that. But to come full circle and to make her proud, I think that's a huge thing for me. As a son.
Congratulations on all fronts. It's I think particularly here in Maine, to be recognized like that is pretty cool. I know a handful of you guys that are in the hall, and it's just all guys that I've always looked up to and said, that when they get inducted, they've done it at a high level, and
long journey for sure. Wasn't easy.
It is, and it's not like this. It's usually like that, know. And
the one thing people may not realize is that I'll address this one more time is that whether you have a relationship with your parents or a sibling or a teammate or whatever, it wasn't just me out there losing.
Yeah,
it hurt her too.
Oh, right.
And when you get to be a parent or when you get to be a coach, you understand that. So I've gotten to understand watching it, watching my son play sports, but also I wasn't just the one losing out there. She was out there and she was hurting too.
Yeah.
And then you get older, you're like, it heals those wounds because you sit back and you're like, you remember how tough those were. And listen, there were some great victories. It's not lonely at the top. When I had some great achievements, I had a lot of friends up there.
Yeah.
It's lonely getting to the top.
Right.
It's not lonely at the top at all. I had a lot of friends up there.
Yeah.
It's lonely getting to the top. Listen, nobody wants to run with you at 4:00 in the morning.
Nope.
Nobody wants to train with you on Christmas.
Lose my number.
Nobody wants to take a trip to Hudson Valley in New York to wrestle because you know that there's going to be a Canadian Olympic team there and you want a piece.
Right.
You want some. So that's a hard thing to do, or asking people for gas money. I've got a lot of stories where I've made some trips around the world on a dime that I've borrowed.
Right.
Just because I had a shot to compete against some really high level people to get my rankings up there or to get, to get some exposure. And I made those trips, and looking back, I got some wood and some metal that have my name on it that sound great. When I look back at more of those trips. Times in a car, singing the Humpty Dance with my buddies, or you know what I mean, like
right.
making ramen noodle dishes, a la carte. It would just
really
different
about
things.
The journey,
and those are the things we talk about. We don't talk about a lot of the championships we've won. We really kind of sit and talk about, like, do you remember we saw this car on fire in Cornell, like in the middle of the parking lot? Like those are funny stories, and so you don't have those stories unless you've been on those journeys.
Right. You get a group of friends, and you're kind of just coming of age through competition.
Oh, it's a real stand by me moment. Yeah. And it really is. It really is.
Well, cool, man. I always try to end with letting somebody kind of have the floor and say, hey, you're going to talk to a bunch of people here. What would you share if either to a new athlete, somebody struggling to lose weight and get in shape, or even, a nugget or two for somebody that's watching this going, you know what? I think I want to go high level. What are some things you can share? I
would say this. well, I'll address the first one. If you're trying to lose weight, you can always contact me. But it's a lifestyle, right? You have to change the way you almost live your life. Depending on how extreme your goals are. I mean, if your goals are to lose 200 pounds, that's probably going to be a significant lifestyle change. If your goal is to lose 10, 20 pounds because you want to do a fitness show, that's a heavy routine. We're talking about a very microcycle. We're talking about a routine that needs to be implemented, and you're not that far off, right? 20 pounds is very reasonable. 200, that's significant investment. And I don't mean financially. I mean really psychologically and physically. If you are an athlete and you want to go to the next level, like a high level, you have to ask yourself a couple questions. Number one, the itch factor. Are you itching to work out, to train, to go to practice? Do you love that? And when you're not doing it, do you itch for it? Like, are you unsettled?
That's a good test.
If your parents are going on a trip and you're at Disney World, you're on the beach, or you're at a hotel, and you're like, I gotta go work out, or I'm watching videos, or I'm in the bathroom and I'm watching YouTube about my favorite player.
Right.
That might be a kid you might want to invest in. If you got a kid who comes after practice and he's got the crap kicked out of him and he's got weird looking hair like myself, I'm talking about myself now, but if you got a kid who's coming after practice and he's gotten beat up on and he goes back the next day and he loves it and he's not having a lot of success but he loves it and he loves his friends, he loves his teammates. Remember, a good indicator of genius is an emotional intelligence.
Right.
People who are very, very smart, very, very, I don't mean people who can, take tests well. I'm talking about intelligent people. We all come across them. Usually they're evaluated by emotional intelligence. When you have a kid who strives to just be better, not to impress others, not to get a trophy, but he wants to get better for the sake of wanting to be better, that's a kid you might want to invest in.
Yeah.
And you have to also point him in the right direction. Like I said before, there's a certain amount of times you can put that iron ore into the fire. There's only a amount of certain times you can hit it with a hammer before it breaks. I think sometimes we do a disservice to kids because we hit them too many times. Yeah. I mean that figuratively, obviously, but sure. I think there's too much pressure we put under them.
Yep.
I think there's too many times we take them through that process. I also think if you're not careful, you can ruin a kid. And that's the tough part, because if you put too much pressure on a kid, or you put them under too much stress, or you put them in too many camps, they're going to hate something they used to love.
Right.
You never want to do that.
That's tough, yeah.
So if anybody has any questions, I say start the first process by having a conversation. Your first step shouldn't be putting under a bar. Your first step shouldn't be going to a supplement store. Your first step shouldn't be, asking them to come in and talk to a high-level coach. Your first step should be observing the kid. Yeah. Observe him. Does he love it? It looks like he really loves it, he or she. Looks like they really love what they're doing. They really want to play. And then watch them. Watch them, who they surround themselves with. There are about 40,000 external factors that will develop your child that you have no influence on.
Wow.
Your environment is the number one. Okay. Your environment is the strongest indicator of where that child is going to go. And if that child is around like-minded people, it doesn't matter if they're around other softball players, if they want to be a softball player. But if they want to be a high-level softball player and they're around other high-level people in general and other things they do, they're probably going to go there because they're going to observe.
That's what they're seeing. It's your environment. Yeah.
The rising tides elevates all boats.
Yeah. Dude, this has been fun.
Appreciate
guys, if you didn't get something out of this, rewind it and watch it again, because he just dropped a ton of bombs on you with regard to just life, fitness, and business. So, Ben McCrillis, thank you for coming. We appreciate it. Congratulations.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
For everything you've got going on.
Yeah.
You're going to be fun to watch. If you're looking to connect with Ben, you can do so at Train Maine Fitness on Instagram. He admittedly doesn't have a huge social media presence, but I'm gonna give him some crap about that after this. So, but this will be out. We'll drop this on Wednesday, and we'll do some reels around it, and hopefully you enjoy it. And I hope this has been good for you. It's been good for us, and I know it's been good for everybody that likes to tune in. So thank you very much.
No worries. Thanks for having me.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks.
All right.
As much.